last week of our series on a guy in the Bible named Joseph. And this series is called Big Picture. So why is it called that? Well, Joseph had a lot of wild and weird and unbelievable things happen in his life. And some of those things were amazing and others of them were horrendous. But all along, God was working toward a bigger picture in his life, a bigger picture that he couldn't see. And the same for us, that God is working in our lives and there's a bigger picture that we can't see. And so that's what we're talking about. Now, before we get to the last part of Joseph's story today, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever tried to get a little payback on someone? Maybe like a sibling who stole your favorite shirt without asking, or a friend who spread a rumor about you. Like, for me, I don't so much plot payback. But what I do is I think about what I would say back to them, right? Like, have you ever had somebody say something mean to you or something that embarrassed you and it makes you so mad, but in the moment you can't like think quickly enough to have like a good comeback because you're just so hurt or angry or surprised at what they're saying. So the words just don't come to you. But then you spend like the next week or 2 weeks or a very long time like rehearsing all the things that you would say back, right? Like you find yourself even talking out loud, like you're saying it to that person, right? Like you're crafting exactly the right words of the thing that you just want to say back to them, like mic drop moment to get them back for what they said to you, right? Like I'm more guilty of that, right? My guess is that you can probably relate, and I know that because in big or small ways, we've all been wronged somehow. We've all been hurt. We've all been frustrated. We've all had someone do something to us or say something to us or treat us in a way that makes us want payback. And we want the other person to experience the amount of pain and frustration and embarrassment that they caused us, right? And here's the thing. We all have the power to pay people back. Like, we do not only have the potential to want payback, but we also have the power to actually do it. Sometimes payback takes the form of publicly shaming someone on social media or doing something to embarrass them in front of somebody else. Sometimes payback looks like spreading a rumor about a person or excluding them on purpose or rolling your eyes at them, like in a really passive-aggressive way, like, right? Sometimes the payback, though, is just in our heads. Like you haven't actually taken a step to actually do the payback, which is good, but you think about it all the time. Like you're constantly setting up the scenario in your mind about like what you would do to pay them back and what you want to say. And even though you might not actually take the steps to make it happen, it is still consuming you, right? You spend time rehearsing how you would pay them back for how they've hurt you. Now listen. I know this all sounds harsh, like talking about paying people back, but, we're all friends here, right? So can we just be honest and admit that we felt this way sometimes? We've been so hurt that we are so angry and embarrassed, and it feels like payback would bring us some sort of justice. It feels like, yes, if I could just get them back, then things would be right in the world because then they would know, right? Like then they would know. But just because payback feels fair, it doesn't mean that it is fair. It doesn't mean that it's what's actually best for us. In fact, I do think there's a better approach that we could all take if we put down our power to pay back other people. So now if there is anyone who had a reason for wanting payback, it's our guy Joseph. His story is full of people betraying him and lying about him and causing him years of pain and suffering that he didn't deserve. So you can imagine, I'm pretty confident he wanted some payback. Now to give you a quick recap of Joseph's story, which we've been talking about over the past 4 weeks, Joseph was one of a dozen sons, but his father, Jacob, loved him the most, and everybody knew it, including his 11 brothers. Because of that, his brothers got so mad, so jealous, that they threw him into a well, and then they eventually took him out, but it wasn't to do something nice. It was like they took him out of the well and they sold him into slavery. And as far as they knew, like, that was it. See ya. Well, throughout Joseph's life, he's sold into slavery, and then he ends up in Egypt. And then what he was actually doing, he was doing a good job, And there he was working, and he got a promotion in the house of this guy named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar's wife made some sexual advances on Joseph. And Joseph, doing the right thing, turned her down. He was like, no, like, you're married. But she made up a lie against Joseph that ultimately got him thrown in prison. And he stayed there for several years until he finally gets released and promoted, and he's allowed to work for the Pharaoh. So that's a pretty wild journey, right? And there's a lot of hurt that's in there that we kind of, breeze by. But there are a lot of things that happened to Joseph that would have been really hard. I rattled those things off that happened to him, but I want you to try to imagine what those things were actually like. I mean, he spent years in slavery, and he ended up there because his own brothers put him there. They sold him into slavery. And that meant he was separated from any family. He was in prison for a long time, all because at the very beginning, his brothers were jealous of him. Now, if I'm Joseph, I would probably be so angry and so hurt about my life and how it had turned out that I would be thinking about getting revenge and paying my brothers back, because I would be like, I was the favorite son, and look at my life, dude. Like, I've spent a lot of life as a slave and in jail, and I would be so angry at my brothers. So I want us to pick up Joseph's story right in that spot. And I want us to find out exactly what he did, because he's got plenty of motive for revenge, plenty of motive for payback. And so at this point in Joseph's story, he's doing a lot better. He had not only been released from prison, but he had actually been elevated to second in command of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of distributing food throughout the entire Egyptian empire, which was a really big deal and an important job, because this was during a period of intense famine. And famine, or just a shortage of food, was so bad that people from far, far away were actually coming to Egypt to find food so that they wouldn't starve, because Egypt had prepared well in advance, mainly because Joseph told them to. And so Joseph is the guy they're coming to, and Joseph is the one in charge of this food distribution. Now, of all the people in the world, guess who shows up to ask Joseph for food? His brothers. The very same people who have sold him into slavery. Here they are. Now they've had to travel to Egypt, and now they are humbly asking their brother Joseph for food. Now Joseph immediately recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Because why would they? After all, they had sold him into slavery years ago. So in their minds, there's no way that this guy with so much power in Egypt is their brother Joseph. Like, they probably assumed he was still a slave or that he was dead by now. But here's Joseph in this position of complete power before his brothers. And here they are, humbly needing his help. They've come there asking for food. And he is the guy overseeing the distribution of food during the famine. He's got all the power for some serious payback for everything that they did to him. This is the moment that Joseph could have been dreaming of, because he's got all of the power and they're desperate. They literally need food to not starve. And so this is the moment where payback could finally be his. But I want you to look at what happened. So what I'm about to read to you is in Genesis chapter 45. It says, Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Because remember, they didn't recognize him. Then he broke down and he wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it carried quickly to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer. And he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me and all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you, your household, and all your animals will starve." So Joseph could have done literally anything he wanted with his brothers. He could have paid them back 1,000,000 times for what they had done to him. He could have said, my, how the tables have turned. Yeah, sorry, you guys aren't getting any food. And they would have been left to die a slow, painful death of starvation. I mean, you hear Joseph say, even after this moment, there are still 5 more years of famine. And so he has the power to say, sorry, no food for you. But instead, Joseph takes a completely different path. He chose forgiveness. I mean, how incredible is that? Can you imagine how surprised and humbled Joseph's brothers must have been? One minute, they find out that their brother Joseph is alive. I mean, that's stunning in and of itself. And then they realize not only is he alive, he's got a lot of power here in Egypt. And Egypt is the only place with resources right now. They're the only place with food. And not only is he tolerating them, he's embracing them rather than seeking any form of retribution or revenge. Here's what I think we can learn from this part of Joseph's story. When you can't see the bigger picture, still choose to forgive. Joseph's response to his brother gives us a powerful example of how God wants us to deal with the people who wrong us. We may never know why they're doing what they're doing or why they did what they did. And they may never apologize to us for the hurt or for the embarrassment that they've caused us. And there are details in the bigger picture that we will never see and frankly will never understand. But we still have a choice. We can choose to forgive or we can choose payback. And we have the power to make that choice. Think of it this way. If you are in a relationship with any other person, that could be a parent relationship or a friend or a sibling or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, anyone, there is something that connects the two of you that forms that relationship. It's really like a bridge, right? And when someone wrongs you or hurts you, that bridge is suddenly broken. It becomes shaky and the connection between you is damaged. So then you're left with a choice. Payback. So payback is wrong for wrong, hurt for hurt. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. What that will do, though, is that will burn the bridge of the relationship. It will completely destroy it. Or you can take that broken bridge and you can build and repair it and restore the bond and the connection in the relationship by showing things like forgiveness and grace and peace. Now, of course, I am not saying that you should keep rebuilding bridges with people who continue to hurt you deeply and repeatedly. Sometimes the best way to actually choose forgiveness is to just get some healthy boundaries or talk about the wrongs done to you with someone that can help you, like an adult. But when it's possible, it is our job to lay down our right to payback and instead choose forgiveness. Joseph could have made the choice to just prove a point. He could have fought to be right. He could have chosen not to help his brothers and just burn the bridge between them and be like, deuces. But instead, he chose to forgive them. He chose to do what he knew was right. He chose to do things God's way. And that changed everything. God continues to tell a beautiful story of his people that all flows from Joseph and his act of forgiveness that welcomes and enables his brothers to live in Egypt where they have plenty of food during this time of famine. And so when we read in our Bibles, what we see is that God uses that act of forgiveness to continue to tell his story in a really beautiful way. When you can't see the bigger picture, still choose to forgive. Now, I am sure you are hearing this and you're like, that sounds nice, JT. That sounds like a thing I expect to hear at church. But in real life, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Like in real life, when I'm embarrassed or angry, all I want is revenge. I just want payback. And isn't that just? Isn't that fair? So here's the thing. No one says forgiveness is easy. I understand this isn't easy. It's hard to choose to be a bridge builder rather than a bridge burner. And what can make it even harder is when we can't see the bigger picture, when we don't know all the details, or we don't have the full story about a situation we're in. So then how do we start? So here's a couple things. First, you want to strengthen your forgiveness muscle. You want to practice and get stronger at extending grace and forgiveness and peace to others in small ways. So, for example, when a friend teases you and it hurts your feelings, you can tell them, but then you make a choice to forgive. Or when your sibling eats the last piece of your birthday cake that you had been saving, tell them it bothered you, but then choose to forgive them. When your parents snap at you for something that was not your fault, choose forgiveness. The more you do this in small, everyday things, the easier it will be when the bigger things come your way because you have strengthened that forgiveness muscle. Second, be like Elsa and let it go. Think about your own life for a second. Who has wronged you recently? You don't need to wait for them to apologize to you. You can go ahead and forgive them. You don't need for them to make the first move. Sometimes we tend to think they owe me an apology and I'm not forgiving them until they say they're sorry. That's just not true. The beauty of forgiveness is that you can do it on your own. You can just let it go. You can make a choice to forgive and not carry it around in your heart. Don't let your heart be consumed by anger and bitterness. Stop holding on to the hurt. Be like Elsa. Let it go. Of course, forgiveness is not always easy, but the good news is we have a God who is the best at forgiving. He has forgiven each and every one of us, and He wants to help us do the same for others. And when we ask for His help forgiving someone else, He will always give it. So today, maybe that's where you need to start. Ask God to help you forgive someone who has wronged you so that you can start building a bridge in that relationship, or that you can repair that bridge in that relationship. My hope and my prayer for you today is that you would choose to forgive, even when you can't see the big picture. Because like Joseph, you trust God, and you trust God's ways of peace and love and grace. Love you guys.